Well, here we go again. Corporate Law 101, an entrepreneur's guide. We're now moving on to Section 1, Part 3, the last part of this section, shareholder agreements. Let's talk about the processes here for shareholder agreements and what is a shareholder agreement and why is that important, okay? Um, I really can't recommend a shareholder agreement high enough if there's more than one shareholder. 2, 3, 5, just the more the merrier. It just makes it much more important, and it really sets the context for operating between the various shareholders. Okay, and it clarifies the ownership, and the shareholder fallout is covered by what the business partners um, have agreed to in advance, rather than waiting till after the fact, because these things do occur, and they do occur regularly. The shareholder agreement is recommended for many reasons, as I said, but how about voting trust agreements and earn-out agreements? They can be kept confidential. They're very much private documents between the shareholder and the company, and you can have an awful lot of activity, especially with an attorney involved, that can keep that confidential to clarify the ownership of the various parties. Especially if you do this, I'll give you some shares here. If you don't do that, you don't get the shares. And especially in sole shareholder agreements where they're starting to give shares to other people, that's very important that you understand why you're giving up shares and what the value that you're receiving is. And again, disputes do occur. There are fallouts for many reasons. Change, and we can talk about some of those. Like, here's one: death of the shareholder, disability of the shareholder. I had a client. They had a guy who'd been around for 15 years, was clearly disabled as a result of a stroke. They carried him for 6 months on the payroll. And at some point in time, the management came to me and said, "What do we do? And we love Joey, but Joey can't stay on the payroll at full fare, and he's not eligible for the company's insurance. He's run out of the workers' comp, and his long-term disability only ran for 6 months. What do we do now?" The shareholder wants to leave. Oops, he wants to go, and he's going to keep his shares, and he wants to go across the street and set up a company right across the street from you. Can he do that? Well, as a shareholder, he certainly can. Now, you could force him, if he's got a non-compete, perhaps, not to do that, or if he has a buyback agreement as part of a shareholder agreement, so that one of the things we'll talk about is being able to buy the shares back. And of course, we talked about disagreements. How about default on various things that you're going to? Joey's supposed to give some money, and Billy's supposed to give some money. Billy gives his, but Joey doesn't give his. Oops, we got a problem. And then determination of the value of the company. Again, the shareholder wants to walk. You're willing to give him a piece of the action, but he thinks you made $10 million last year. He's a third owner. He gets $30 million. No, that's not the way it works. You made $10 million. You spent $9 million. You only made $1 million. He only gets $300,000. Hey, if he's expecting $3 million and you're only offering $300,000, as they say, Lucy, you got splaining to do. It's very hard for some of the investors to understand. Okay. Shareholders versus employment. Just because you're just because you're a shareholder doesn't mean you could be an employee. He has no right to employment. Just think about it. If you go buy a share of General Motors, you don't automatically get a job. And also, you want to talk about the classes of stock. We talked about it a little bit when we were filling out the form. Preferred shares. I'm going to give you money. You're going to put in some software or some hardware or some sweat equity, as they say. You're going to work for the company, maybe for no fee or for a reduced fee. Make sure you get those things in writing between you, because people have a tendency to forget, and especially the sweat equity folk. The sweat equity folk forget that the other guy brought in real cash, and the real cash guy looks at the sweat equity guy. Well, I brought real cash. I mean, all you brought was some of your hours, which, you could have been home watching TV. That wasn't worth anything. Well, nothing infuriates the sweat equity guy more than he or she putting all their effort in and then finding out that the money guys want to take it away from them because they aren't of the same level. Well, you need to get those things out on the table right away. In closing up this area, I'm just going to tell you again, we highly recommend you get a shareholders agreement. I can't tell you how many times for startups I bring 3 people in and I say, who owns the company? And all 3 say, I do. And they don't mean we do. They mean they do. And then they start looking at each other going, well, wait a minute here. You didn't do anything, or I'm not going to do anything. I'm not giving up that much shares. things of that sort. I thought I was going to own 75%. Then you get the same three shareholders who decided to set up the corporation, didn't bother to put a shareholder agreement together, and have been running it for 2 years. Oops, they start to make some money, and now one of them wants to go off and do something different. And if they don't have a shareholder agreement, what do? They can lock each other up. They can take, all of a sudden their income goes down by a third or more, especially if the person leaving is the money maker in the company. And if you don't have a way to buy back the shares and keep them employed and or in the company, that can be a real tragedy for the company. And then of course there's the people who don't have any kind of an agreement, and they think they're going along. They get a business going, and all of a sudden somebody walks in and decides to buy it, and the only person that you find out has any shares is the one guy that set up the company, and he never offered any shares. Nobody ever brought it up. They kind of intimidated the other parties around, and he looks or she looks out, and I've seen it both ways. He or she looks out and says, "What are you talking about? This is my company. I didn't offer you anything." And in truth, they didn't. It didn't mean that you or the other people didn't think that you deserved it. Holy moly. So, a change in personal circumstance, a change in a lot of things, as we talked about, death, dismemberment, anything, those kinds of things. You got to be very careful here, folks. So I hope you've enjoyed this first part of our presentation. I really look forward to going through in the next section. Basically, we'll be going through shares and shareholders and beginning to learn now more about how the company structure really works. And that's it for now for this tutorial. Copyright 2017, BrainTech CSI Inc., all rights reserved.